So, as many of you know, I'm Joyce Duffala. I'm a minister here at the center, and it's my great honor to stand in for Dr. Edward today, who's in Bali. He'll be back next week. And as many of you know, I am married to another minister here, Reverend Kim Kaiser. And recently, Reverend Kim and I were on a trip, and we went to Weaverville up there in Trinity County. And it's a smallish town. It sounds like some of us know it. But what a particularly astounding thing about Weaverville is that there is a Taoist temple that was built in the 19th century by Chinese laborers that still functions. People still come and they worship there. So you can imagine me and Reverend Kim, off we went, and there was a tour, and we went inside this temple, and the first thing that we noticed was how beautiful the colors were, and the designs, and the soft smell of a couple centuries of incense being burnt in there. I was aware as I walked through the temple of how many feet over 200 years had done the same thing. And before that, in a similar temple in China, a couple thousand years, people like you, people like me, just coming to be in the presence. So after we took in the beauty of the temple, the peace of the temple, the guide said, well, let's come into the room next door. The room next door was different because it had been an administrative office and a store and a post office, kind of a general place for the Chinese community to take care of business. And there wasn't much in it anymore, nothing really to see, bare floors. But on the walls, there was this delicate Chinese writing all over the walls. And of course, it was meaningless to us, although it looked beautiful, so we asked the guide what this was about. And he said that it was records of people's lives. It was when people were born and when people got married and the children they had and when they passed on and when they moved here and when they left and that kind of thing. And he pointed out that this wall had become very important in Chinese, especially Chinese American history, that it was photographed a lot and the information was made available to Chinese people in America and beyond. So we kind of wondered, well, what could be in Weaverville that is so important? And he told us that after World War II, a serviceman returned to get a civil service job in the records office in San Francisco, and this gentleman regrettably returned from World War II with just an embodied antagonism to the Japanese. And he came across Chinese documents, and in his ignorance, he thought it was Japanese. And in his anger and hate, he destroyed the records. Yes, so here's one of the main gateways, the entrance of the Chinese community into the States, lost. And we took this in quietly, and he said, I know it's hard for us to appreciate that mindset. We were quiet for a moment, and I said, well, I can imagine a contemporary scenario where somebody comes across something written in Arabic script and just tosses it. And we were quiet again because I think perhaps some of the people like me were thinking, oh my gosh, that's something I could do. Just, I don't know what this is. And it was then that I realized how little in my education, in my life, how little I know about the culture, the Arabic culture, and about Islam. So it was with a sense of gratitude that I welcomed the topic I'm assigned to do today as we begin a month of studying Islam. The name of the talk is the same as the name of the first chapter in our book of the month. It is, Why Has Islam Become So Important? Now, our book of the month is The Complete Idiot's Guide to Islam. And so my first piece of inner work was to get over the title of the book. Because you see, after 20 years here of training my mind to focus on my good qualities, my God qualities, here I am holding something that is like suggesting I'm a complete idiot. So, I wasn't picking up the book, and I said, okay, I've got to do something to get over this. Let's work with this. Let's break it down. So, I thought, okay, complete. Are you complete? And I thought, oh, well, yeah, that's something we teach. We teach here that on a spiritual level, we are whole, complete, and perfect, lacking nothing. That on a spiritual level, we are of the nature of God, whole, complete, and perfect. Now, our lives don't always look like that, and I understand that our spiritual path is about releasing things that are hiding that truth, releasing any idea, releasing any thought, releasing any belief, releasing any attachment, any opinion, any activity that is covering up the spiritual truth that you and I are whole, complete, and perfect. And as we do that work, what is revealed in our lives is that perfection, is that sense of completeness. So, okay. I've now gotten through 2 words in the title, the complete. Here comes idiot. So, of course, we know what idiot means these days, but I thought, well, where'd this word come from? So, I looked back and I found that in Greek, from which this comes, there was a word idios. And idios simply means unto itself. And I thought, well, I could run with that. Unto itself, special, unique, a unique expression of God, just like all of us are, a unique expression of God. And so I then was able to reframe the title of the book. And by the way, after first service, sales went up in the bookstore. Seriously. Complete idiots, it just rubs against the old metaphysical grain. Anyhow, the new title for me is The Whole, Complete, and Perfect Unique Expression of Spirit's Guide to Islam. All right, I've made it through the title of the book. Oh, it's the content. All right, here we go. So today's talk title, Why Has Islam Become Important, is the title of the first chapter there. And as I was working with it, I found my mind was starting to organize, looking at the question of what's important in Islam. What's important in Islam to us, who are members of a global village? What's important to us on our own spiritual path here at the Center for Spiritual Living, where we study the science of mind and spirit? And what's important about Islam to practicing Muslims themselves? So let's begin by thinking about what's important to us as citizens of a global village. Well, the first thing is that many of us are practicing Islam. In fact, over 1/5 of the population of the world practices Islam. And if you think about that, if you were at an international gathering talking to 4 people, at least one of them would be Muslim. And in the United States, our American neighbors are almost 10% Muslim. So, as a citizen of a global village, it seems to me we should know about the people who make it up. Secondly, the contribution of the Arabic culture is not so well known to me, the way I grew up in our educational system, but it turns out that, according to scholars, Arabic culture had at least as much influence as European culture and Chinese culture, particularly in the areas of art, science, medicine, and math. We have the Arabs to thank for the concept of zero. Can you imagine life calculations without the concept of zero? Beyond that, they actually gave us our numbers. You may recall as a kid, they told you they were called Arabic numerals. Indeed, they were, because they were what came after a lot of people were using these things. And, that gets a little cumbersome. I don't know about you, but I'm not so sure how I'd go about figuring out what LX22 multiplied by VIII plus XIV is. So thank goodness for Arabic numbers. The other thing is that in our language, in our language, English, you can see the influence of Arabic any time that a word begins with AL, with al. So we have things like alchemy and alcohol and algebra. So, which you need a zero to do, by the way. So finally, another reason that it's important for us as global citizens to know about Islam is that you may have noticed there's so much prejudice and misunderstanding and misinformation floating around the media and conversations in our society. So I think it becomes the responsibility of people like you and me, people who actually can step out of reactivity long enough to get accurate information to do exactly that. So, for example, hot button for me, issues about women. Whenever I hear anything about women abuse, reactive. And you know the kind of press we get about things in the Middle East. So what I've taken to doing is when I hear a story about female abuse, I begin to ask myself the question, is this really about Islam? Or is it about the individuals, the society, the culture in which this incident has happened? You know, in the history of Europe, 600,000 women were burned at the stake in the name of Christianity. Now, does that have anything to do with Jesus' teaching? No. So I have to ask myself the question, what does Islam say about women? And I got it right out of the Whole, Complete, and Perfect Unique Expression of God's guide. The author tells us Islamic law considers women to be equal with men in all respects. Men and women have the same religious and moral duties, and the economic rights of women are identical to men. Husbands do not acquire the property of their wives upon marriage. Women have full right to vote in Islam and can hold positions of authority over men. All of these principles have had their examples in Islamic history and are proven from the time of the Prophet Muhammad. And indeed, I found that Muhammad was pretty hip. As a young man in his 20s, he was involved in business, and he met a woman who was 20 years older than himself. This woman, her name was Khadija. Khadija was a widow, and her husband had died, and she had taken over the business of her husband. Very unusual in that time and place. So here's Khadija, the businesswoman. She hires Muhammad. They fall in love. They get married, and they have a daughter. The daughter's name is Fatima. And when Muhammad approaches death, he bequeaths his spiritual lineage, his teachings, his tradition, his revelations, not to his close male colleagues, but to Fatima. You'll notice when you start to meet more and more Muslims that girls are often named Fatima. It's a high honored name. So, I'm grateful that I had that opportunity to step out of my own reactivity long enough to actually look at what the faith has to say. I also noted my own laziness in general in doing that, and I also am reminded that this really is the kind of work we are called to do if we are working to create a world that works for everyone. So those were some of my thoughts about why Islam is important to us as global villagers. And so why is it important to us from the point of view of our philosophy here, our own spiritual path, the science of mind and spirit? Well, first of all, we believe, as you know, and as Chris and we sang together, there's only one of us. We are one with each other, with all of humanity, with all creatures. And given that, it's never a good idea to hold ill will towards somebody else. As we know, as it's given out, so it returns. Holmes has a very beautiful passage. He tells us, the one who has learned to love all people will find plenty of people who will return that love. The reason is this: as all is divine mind, and as we attract to us what we first become, until we learn to love, we are not sending out love vibrations, and not until we send out those vibrations can we receive love in return. So I speak for myself in noticing that there's times when there's judgment, unloving thoughts to people near and dear to me, around me, to people who are friends, to people who are acquaintances, and it seems to amplify, if I don't know somebody or if they are different from me, that if I'm not careful, I can have some unloving thoughts. Another reason that it's important to us on our spiritual path to pay attention to Islam is because our founder, Ernest Holmes, encouraged us to stay open at the top. And by that, he meant, don't get stuck in my understanding of spirituality, but rather continue to explore, continue to look at ways of understanding God, continue to expand your own understanding of God, continue to pay attention to what your own divine intuition is telling you is right understanding for you. So then, as we begin to take a look at what Muslims themselves find important about Islam, I found that a helpful question for me was to keep in mind, as I look at this different thing, what can I recognize? And by recognize, I mean both what seems familiar to me, as in, oh, I see you on the street and I recognize you, you're familiar to me. And it also means, what can I recognize? What can I know? What can I know again in a new way? So, for example, if we study a tradition where there's a meditation practice, and maybe it's different from my meditation practice, but in studying that tradition, I can get an increased understanding and encouragement in my own practice of meditation. So, probably the biggest blessing that happened to me in the preparation of this talk was it happened a few weeks ago when I met a practicing Muslim right here at the center. it was one of those seemingly chance encounters. It was one of those Sundays where Edward said, "Oh, before you go home today, go introduce yourself to somebody you don't know." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I am the assistant minister. Let me be a role model here." So I saw a man standing alone in the social hall, and I went up to introduce myself to Ali, and we spoke for a few moments just by ourselves, and then his male partner came up and pointed out to me that Ali never comes to the center because he's a practicing Muslim. And I thought, oh gosh, source material. So I said, I asked him if he would be kind enough to make some time to speak with me about what's important to him in Islam. And within the week, I was in his home for well over 2 hours. And I could just see how much this man was in love with his spiritual practice, how much he was in love with the Divine One. As I sat with him, I noticed a real sense of peace emanating from him. And it was a feeling that I had only previously experienced among Buddhist monks or Indian teachers who are involved 24/7 in their practice. And as I spoke with Ali, I came to find out that he is involved in his practice 24/7, that he is in constant prayer. He has some prayer beads, and even though he has a commute and a hectic job, he is constantly turning his awareness to the presence of the Divine One. So after my conversation with Ali, if I had to say, what have I discovered is the essence of Islam, I would say these words: it's a constant courting of the divine presence. It's a constant remembering, a constant bringing awareness to the presence of the Divine One. In fact, it seems like the religion is set up to get its practitioners to do that. In Islam, there are 5 pillars of spiritual practice, and in addition to prayer, there's also giving, both financially and in service. There's fasting during the month of Ramadan, and as possible, there is the requirement that a person, an individual, make a pilgrimage to Mecca, which is the birthplace of both Muhammad and also of Islam. Ali has made his pilgrimage, and I was very moved when, at the end of our conversation, he presented me with these prayer beads that come from Mecca. There are 100 of them, and they are used. There's an extra one, and the other 99 are used to recite the 99 names of God. Ali also told me of his practice of surrender, of turning things over to the Divine One, to Allah. So, for example, every night he thinks about what he wants to happen the next day, and then he has a thought something like, this is what I think would be good, but I'm turning it over. So if you also think it's a good idea, if it is your will, then take care of it. And then he doesn't worry about it anymore. Islam, in fact, means surrender. Surrender to the will of God. And a Muslim is simply one who surrenders to the will of God. And when I heard that, I thought, well, that sounds familiar. You know, here we also recognize that there's a power for good that is working constantly for us, that there's an infinite loving intelligence that desires the best for us. And one of our practices is to turn to it and allow ourselves to let it have its way with us for our highest good. And so as we close today, I invite you to turn to that one by allowing the eyes to close, the body to relax, the breath to deepen.
I will make a quiet place within my mind, and I will wait upon the Lord, wait upon the Lord. Be still, my soul, be still. Be still, my soul, be still and know.
And in this quiet place, we ask the question, what is my highest good? What is it that the greatest of all loves desires for me, for my own happiness, for my own peace, my own good? And we wait.
I will make a quiet place within my heart, and I will wait upon the Lord, wait upon the Lord. Be still, my soul, be still, my soul, be still and know.
And once again, we turn to this greatest of intelligences, this power for good, and we simply ask, what is mine to do? And we wait.
I will make a quiet place within my life, and I will wait upon the Lord, wait upon the Lord.
We give thanks for the good that has been revealed, and for the good that continues to be revealed. And as we begin to bring our attention from the inside to what is going on around us, we continue to wait upon the Lord, that power that desires only good for all. And so it is.